used to having that many visitors have to build so many infrastructures to support these events. And these cities have to pay for it themselves to support it. Given that the Olympics will be here, there's been a lot of changes to the transportation, and people have argued that we've been needing changes to transportation. We need more access to them. What are your thoughts on that? How they're deciding now to do it? And is it for the people here, or is it going to be for the visitors to accumulate more money?
Well, I mean, coming to work this morning and coming to meet with you, I was on the 405, so you can imagine what that was like. What the IOC insists on is that all hosts of Olympic events have to have designated Olympic lanes. So as we have the HOV lane on the 405 and other freeways around the city, that could potentially be the Olympic lane. So that means all officials, all athletes will be able to use it. The fans, of course, will not be able to use it. The Los Angeles Metropolitan Transportation Authority requested $3.2 billion from the Trump administration to fund transportation projects. And this is for roughly 3,000 additional buses to transport millions of expected spectators. But of course, recently Trump's transportation secretary suggested that kind of funding would be cut if there were any a continuation of anti-ICE protests. So it becomes a real political hot potato in many ways. And this is where I think the Trump administration has to be very careful, because Trump has said how wonderful the games are, but at the same time, does he necessarily want the Olympic Games to be a great success? Because our governor, Gavin Newsom, may be a presidential candidate in the same year of 2028. And do we want Los Angeles to have all this does Trump want Los Angeles to have all this success and all this glory and this Californian success? So they're political questions that we need to consider. Alondra, your question around transportation is an important one. I think the Olympic Games and the FIFA World Cup is not going to solve Los Angeles's transportation issues. Of course, for those who use LAX, there are going to be new metro connections that'll open up in the next months as we speak. But I was chatting to a colleague about driving to work, and she said, well, why don't you catch public transport? And I said, it would take me 2.5 hours and 4 different forms of transportation. So this is into neighborhoods in the San Fernando Valley, in Northridge. Those are the kinds of transportation infrastructure developments we need. But after the recent devastating fires in Altadena and Pacific Palisades, priorities have changed. And there's some people that are even asking whether an Olympic Games should even be held in the city when we have such serious issues around fire and the fire damage, but also the number of homeless people that we have in Los Angeles. We have in excess of 50,000. And if you look back at the statistics from 1984, the numbers were very similar. And what we find is that in 1984, the police literally picked up homeless people in downtown Los Angeles, moved them out, because tourists were going to be seen downtown. And this is not something that's unique to...
Well, didn't Brazil do the same thing?
Exactly. This is not unique to Los Angeles. It was done in South Africa. People were literally forcibly removed. And this is a direct link to what happened during apartheid South Africa, where people were first forcibly removed by the police. This happened in South Africa. This happened in Brazil in 2016. It happened in Tokyo during the 2020 COVID Olympics. So this will happen again in Los Angeles, and I put this in inverted commas for people to see that there's this notion of cleaning up the city. We don't clean up human beings; we house human beings, and this is where there is a real serious question has to be asked: is do we need more hotels or do we need more homes?
It reminds me of the fable of Catherine the Great. When I was growing up, this is one of the fables that I was told, that she only wanted to see beautiful Russia. And so her people, her advance guard would go in and put up these facades that made these communities look really fantastic, but they were just facades. And people were dying of starvation and poverty behind the facades that would go up to when she would visit the people in the country. And I keep wondering about, who are the games for then?
I think that's a good comparison, a good analogy, and that's exactly what happens during these mega events. They are facades. They are this beautification of cities for a very short period of time and for a specific kind of clientele. And I call them clientele because they are customers. It is those people that can afford literally hundreds of dollars worth of tickets. So a ticket is not going to be a $25 ticket. It's going to be probably a $125 ticket. They're going to be very expensive, and people are going to be excluded. And I take this in the South African context. In 2010, South Africa is a country that's made up of a range of different racial groups. White South Africans are roughly around 5 to 6% of the population. Black South Africans are the majority. In these World Cup stadia, and I attended several of the games, and this is just anecdotal remark, but something which others have said as well, is that when you looked at the stadia, when you looked at the spectators, the vast majority of spectators were white. And this was in the South African context, in the southern tip of Africa. One has to ask the question, where were the black spectators? The black spectators were excluded because they couldn't afford the tickets. And I wonder whether the same is not going to be happening in Los Angeles, where we have a great diverse population, and only those that are able to afford these tickets will be able to participate within these events.
It's almost like it's self-selecting. I mean, if you're going to fly, pay for the airline ticket, and it's not just you by yourself. You're usually bringing either your family or you're going with a group of friends, and then so that's hundreds of dollars for one person, so that's thousands of dollars for a group of you. You're going to spend a hotel room. You're not coming here for one night. You're also not coming here for one game. You're not going to buy one ticket. So all of that adds up to a self-selecting exclusion.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. This is not a cheap event. And FIFA and the IOC know this because they can charge these prices because there is a market. You see every summer when European soccer clubs come over to the United States, the matches are not particularly serious. They're all training matches in a sense. But the stadium are absolutely full. And the prices you pay for these tickets are more than you'd pay for games in official league games in Europe. But people pay for these games because there's a market. And as long as there's a market, people are going to make money off it.
I have one more question about tensions. The world political tensions at this time of politics situation, not just in the United States, but also in Europe and elsewhere in the world, tensions have really, really escalated. Is it fair to assume, maybe more during the World Cup, because that is a very self-selecting audience, but everybody tunes on to the Olympics. Is it fair to expect us all to suspend our fears, our frustrations, our anger with the political upheaval we're all experiencing for just those 3 weeks?
Well,
or is it the officials are assuming that people will put aside their lives for those 3 weeks and not let life live and the realities of life's impact affect how they view these exclusionary games?
Look, I mean, that's a broader philosophical question and an important question itself, but I think FIFA and the IOC, and you can already see that with FIFA. One just has to watch television in the United States. There's already this momentum that's building up to the event. People are getting excited. The recent World Club event was all part of that preparation. So I think whatever is happening around the world, people are still going to participate in these events. I have no doubt that they're going to be financially incredibly successful. But this is where we have to consider folks on the ground who are asking critical questions. And there are several organizations just in our city, Los Angeles. You just have to Google No Olympics, and you will see there are organizations that are asking these kinds of questions. People have been protesting the upcoming events. People have protested in other cities and in other countries, and there is resistance to these events. And I think that's important. And I think people who are interested in these questions, these broader socio-political questions, just need to consider what are the real environmental costs? What are the real financial costs? What are the human rights costs? And I think that's a question, and then they have to answer for themselves.
I have two visions, two questions popping in my mind. The first vision is, I hate to say this, the '68 Chicago Democratic Convention, because again, it was a political theater, but the people outside those doors didn't want theater. They wanted people to address reality. But at the same time, I can see people outside protesting the exclusionary nature, but then the athletes have become more and more human. They're more and more aware of their humanity and the role they play in their communities that they identify with. They're not all saying, you have sports teams that are still displaying pride, celebrating Black lives, even though there's been a directive from on high. We're talking professional sports teams. They're saying, screw that. Our players believe this is the philosophy of our team, and we don't care what you're telling us. I have that vision. And let's not forget Mexico City.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, just recently, one of the most prominent and indeed one of the best soccer players around the world, Mo Salah, who is Egyptian, who plays for Liverpool and obviously the Egyptian national team, was responding to the death of a Palestinian soccer player who was killed when the IDF bombed a certain part of Gaza, and UEFA, the European Football Federation, sort of sent out this bland, generic condolences, and Mo Salah posted on social media, why was he killed? Who killed him? And that got people talking. I think it's important that athletes such as Mo Salah, but there's several others who ask these important political questions. President Trump, during his first term, referred to basketball players in the United States disparagingly and told them they needed to shut up and play. And there's always been this discussion that sport and politics should be separated. And it's my argument has always been it's virtually impossible. Sport is political. Just look at the Olympic Games, or the World Cup, the fact that we have different nation states with different flags is in itself political. But recently, the president of FIFA, the Swiss chap Infantino, took the World Cup trophy to the White House and said to Trump, "You are only this. This was recently won by Argentina. This trophy is only held by winners." And he gave it to Trump as something to hold on to. So the president of FIFA, the head of FIFA, is politicizing the FIFA World Cup in itself. So I hope there's protest, and I hope there's serious questions, and I hope there is some form of resistance. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see banners and flags in the stadia in the World Cup next year, and indeed in the Olympic Games in 2028. I just fear for how these protesters are going to be treated by security forces, especially in the context of this real weaponization, militarization of the security forces.
These two situations guarantee that the world is watching.
Absolutely. In South Africa in 2010, the then President Jacob Zuma said just before the upcoming World Cup, he said on public television, he said, "We have to behave. The world is watching." And indeed, the world is watching. And the international media will be out in full force. And if anything similar to what has happened in the city around the ICE raids, for example, if anything similar happens in or during this event, this will be world news. This will be even more, will receive even more coverage than what the recent ICE raids have received. So, of course, the local organizers, and I would imagine the Trump administration is very, very cognizant and concerned with this. They have to appear to be welcoming, but at the same time, they have to also behave in a certain way.
You know, it's funny, we talked about the Qatar World Cup. What I remember from the World Cup is not who won it. What I remember with the crackdown on Pride paraphernalia than the reporter. So it has long last. I know Qatar is working day and night to improve its international image, but that's what I remember of Qatar.
This goes back to this notion of sports washing. The Qatar World Cup, in many ways, was a culmination of decades-long strategy and work on behalf of the Qatari administration or regime. In effect, remember they own and sponsor several European soccer clubs. PSG, Paris Saint-Germain in France, for example, is such an example. They're the recent winners of the Champions League in Europe, and they in many ways are this embodiment of how money can be used, how finances, billions of dollars can be used to sports wash, and in a way sanitize, inverted commas, the image of these countries. And I think one of the real tragedies of Qatar, of course, the several thousand workers that were killed, but also the LGBT community that were excluded and have subsequently continued to be excluded from any sort of visible events where these big organizations are cracking down, trying to be non-political, where they have been in the past. The Black Lives Matter movement has also been impacted, taking the knee. Athletes are no longer doing this. They're looking at other forms of activism. So there really is this attempt to sanitize these sporting events and make them apolitical or non-political. But the reality is they are political and they will always be political.
These events impact so many different groups of people, but the FIFA and the Olympics are never going to change because they care about profits. Is there a way that consumers can reimagine these events, if anything, because that's the only way that there would ever be any change?
Well, I think fans, consumers, but also sports fans have the agency, have the ability to bring about change. And we see that in European soccer, for example. In the last couple of years, there have been discussions around creating a European Super League, which essentially would be all the top teams from different European leagues would be combined into one league. And it would just make more money for these elite clubs and more money for the European Football Association. Several fan groups, thousands of fan groups, and indeed several soccer clubs came out and said, this is not what we want, right? And I think if fans, as these consumers, put pressure on their local football federations and say, well, we are not prepared to participate in this event. So, for example, if the Mexican Football Association said, we are not prepared to participate in the FIFA World Cup because of the way Latinos or Mexicans are being treated in Los Angeles, that would mean the organization FIFA would have to respond, would have to address the Mexican Football Association's concerns. But that's all up to the fan groups. The fan groups themselves have to organize. The fan groups themselves have to use their agency, and if they're concerned, they need to bring about change. I don't think this is a model that is sustainable long term. The FIFA World Cup and the IOC, and eventually there is going to have to be some sort of compromise, and we're going to have to reimagine it. And it would be great if we could reimagine it with the fans involved, with local communities involved, rather than this elite of officials in the IOC and FIFA located in Switzerland.
I think you're already seeing it, at least in the bids to find a home in the United States for the Olympics and all of those. I mean, let's be honest, and I'm a multi-generation Southern Californian, so I love Los Angeles. I would never live anywhere else. And believe me, I lived all over this country. I choose Los Angeles. But one of the reasons we got the games is because we already had facilities to accommodate the games. And so many communities, so many cities said, no, we're not spending billions. And that came from the residents saying, I'm not going to tax myself billions of dollars for a one-time event, or I'm not even going to be able to afford to buy the tickets to attend. Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. I mean, that's where the recent Boston Olympic bid, where it was a non-starter, is because local residents said that we don't want to be part of this. But if we think about that, if we think about the the World Cup in 26 and the Olympic Games in 2028, if we think of the stadia that we have, of course, the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. We have the Coliseum in essentially in downtown Los Angeles. The Coliseum, if that is going to be used in any ways, they're going to have to be serious renovations. We have the SoFi, which costs several $billion. So this may have been private money, but the incentives going into these local communities, as I've spoken about displacement, as I've spoken about gentrification, these are the knock-on effects. And while Los Angeles may have the infrastructure in place, there are other concerns, as I've said, the environmental concerns, the sports washing concerns, the weaponization, the displacement, the movement of local communities, and of course the movement of the homeless, unhoused people out of these neighborhoods and these areas.
Oh, there's also, I'm paying for that bus. It's my taxes that are paying for the bus.
All of our taxes, right?
What would that even look like? Like a more sustainable and a more ethical sporting event? What would that look like?
I mean, I think we're going to have to reimagine that. I think the first thing is obviously look at the costs, and look at the profits. Who's actually making those profits? Who's taking those profits home? We've got to reconsider how we distribute the finances. Maybe consider distributing more to local associations. Maybe consider having events across the world, having events in different cities. If we're going to talk about infrastructure, if we were serious about traffic and transportation in Los Angeles, we wouldn't be buying 3,000 more buses, because what do 3,000 more buses do? They just clog up our existing freeways. We need to really expand public transportation in terms of the metro system, in terms of real affordable and accessible public transportation. So there's several ways I think that can be done, but we have to use that agency. We have to have various stakeholders. It has to be the fans themselves, the local communities, local politicians have to reimagine these games, because these games have, in the current context, as we know, have really sort of taken off from the late 70s onwards. So it's over the last 50 years that these events have really been monetized in fantastically unimaginable ways that bring in billions of dollars. And indeed, if you think of the recent announcement that in 2028, the sports arenas around Los Angeles will all be open to corporate sponsorship. In other words, they have naming rights for these stadia, which is the first time this is taking place in IOC history, in Olympic history. So we see this monetization, but I think it's the local organizers, local officials, local communities, local groups need to push and start to ask these kinds of questions. How do we reimagine the Olympics? How do we reimagine the FIFA World Cup?
Do you think that's going to happen soon, given the political climate, that people are starting to recognize these things? They're starting to see like the problem with us hosting these events, given what's happening in Los Angeles. Do you think that people are starting to get more angry, or do you think this is instead going to continue to be covered up, and we might not see change for a while once again?
It's difficult. I mean, it's difficult to know what will happen. Mm-hmm. But I think it's, people are asking questions. There are people protesting. There are people on the streets who, and this will only grow. I mean, if we have further crackdown from the Trump administration, there will be more protests. And I think as we lead up to the World Cup next year, the potential is to have large-scale protests, as we had in Brazil. In particular, people will be saying, this bread and circuses doesn't work for us. We don't have bread, and we don't want circuses. We want real change. So it's difficult to predict these kinds of trends, but we just have to look at historically where things have changed. And I take my own country, going back to 1984, watching Zola Budd trip Mary Decker. Who would have thought in 1984, state of emergency in apartheid South Africa, that 10 years later, South Africa would be a multi-party democratic state with Nelson Mandela as the first democratically elected president, and 16 years after that, host their first men's World Cup. So I think we have to use our imagination and we have to dream, but we also have to be realistic of the real challenges that we face.
That's a perfect note to end on, Dr. Bolsmann. I truly, truly appreciate you coming to our podcast and talking about this thing. And I have a sneaking suspicion we're going to have you back again and again. Thank you. And thank all of you for joining us for this episode of Diving into the Discourse.